Hello, I'm Alistair McIntyre of Electric Scotland, and today's video is to give you some information about some of the research I've been doing on the Scots at home and abroad. I think with all the plethora of books that comes out, you know, Scots invented the modern world and the Mark of the Scot and all kinds of interesting books that have come out, I got kind of interested in finding out why the Scots were so good. I mean, we're extraordinarily inventive, you know. I mean, we've done massive inventions that really kick-started the whole Industrial Revolution. And we're still being very inventive today. But, you know, we did a lot in philosophy, I mean, like economics, you know, Adam Smith's Wealth of Nations, and so forth and so on. And Scots also went out into the world and did amazing things. And I was starting to say to myself, I mean, what was it that made the Scots so inventive? Fortunately, I would say that Scots have been extraordinarily good at documenting and writing histories for many centuries. So there's a massive body of work out there in the old days about people and about things. So I decided on my side that I would start work on doing biographies and autobiographies of some of those really prominent, successful Scots. The idea was to see if there was any common thread that could be detected that might give us a clue as to why they were so successful. And I believe I've discovered why we were so successful. And this is the purpose of this video, is to tell you my findings. And I would obviously encourage anyone that's in the educational field and is looking at how they can do better education for our kids. I think they would be worthwhile reading some of these biographies of these eminent Scots and see if you pick up the same common threads as I'm picking up and how that might be applied to education of today. The first thing I noticed is that I don't think that there was even one of those eminent Scots that wasn't brought up with the Bible. Now, I'm not a particularly religious person. Yes, I do go to church from time to time. No, I'm not a regular churchgoer or anything like that. But one thing I noticed was that in Scotland, back in the, shall we say, the 18th, 19th centuries, certainly, coming in maybe to the 20th century, the one book that seemed to be in all Scottish homes was the Bible. Now, bearing in mind, in the early days, books were kind of expensive, so many homes didn't have many books, although some had quite a lot, but most didn't have many books at all. But it seemed to me that every one of these eminent Scots biographies I looked at, they all had the Bible at home. And the Bible was kind of, as far as I can see, it was used to teach the kids to read and to write. And it seemed to develop their memory as well. Part of the reason for that was that in these old days, the minister used to visit his parishioners. And in particular, he was interested to see if the young children were being brought up with the Bible. And so, invariably when he visited, he would take some time to bring each of the children in one by one to quiz them on their knowledge of the Bible. And as a result of that, it seemed to me that almost all these eminent Scots could recite whole passages of the Bible. And no matter your religious bent, I have to say that if you were to look at the Ten Commandments, it's not a bad way to live your life. It really isn't. And of course, when you look at the Bible from maybe even a non-religious point of view, there are tons of stories with a lot of good parallels, you know, like the Good Samaritan and so forth. And I mean, there's all kinds of things. There's violence in the Bible, there's wars, there's battles, there's all kinds of things in the Bible. So, in actual fact, it's actually a very good read, quite apart from the religious aspects of it. But then, So if you consider that each of these eminent Scots was brought up with the Bible and they all had good knowledge of the Bible, but because it seemed to me that every child in Scotland, or just about every child in Scotland, was brought up with the Bible, it meant when they first went to school, because you all knew that, it was like an icebreaker, because I'm quite sure they would have talked about the Bible at school, being that it was such a big part of their lives. But when they got to the school, they were usually able to read and write, and they had developed a good memory because they had to recite a lot of these hymns and parallels and all kinds of things to the minister. So that was the first common thing that I noticed. But then the schools that they first went to seemed to me to be almost all one-room schools. Because a lot of them were brought up not in the major cities, but in actual fact in small communities up glens and so forth. So it was a one-room school, and almost all of them talk about the fact they had to carry either coal or peats to school so they could warm the building, especially in the winter, of course, you know. So one gets in their mind that none of these schools were particularly comfortable. They were, they were educating people at different years. So it wasn't like, there was a class for 1 year, like all the 5-year-olds were in one class. There was a mix of ages that were in that one room. So you can't say, I took it from that there's been discussion recently about better buildings for education. But all these really famous and successful Scots were brought up in unfavourable school conditions. So I would kind of tend to suggest that the buildings aren't the problem in education today. And then the next thing I noticed was, I think certainly I would say almost all of them talked about discipline at school, about being physically punished. And apparently quite hard. They were thrashed, basically. We don't agree with that today, but the old saying, spare the rod and spoil the child? There seemed to be something in that if there was inattention at school, you got thrashed. If you didn't do your homework, you were thrashed. In other words, it was pretty tough in a lot of these schools. But what that meant was that, as far as I can see, again, all these eminent Scots really paid attention at school. And in fact, they did extremely well at school. And a lot of them went to universities at an extraordinary early age because of that. You see often references, a kid of 14 gets into university. So to me, there was like, the common thread, therefore, was that all of them are brought up with the Bible. Now, bearing in mind, if I say that, today, we're not all brought up with the Bible. In fact, today there isn't one book that everyone reads. There really isn't. We're now on the internet, and everyone, you could say the internet is now our book. But it's about so many topics. You can't think of a topic that isn't on the internet. So I feel that when your kids are being brought up, the fact that we're brought up with the Bible, I think, was a good thing. In fact, I was talking to a friend of mine recently, Nola Cruz, it happens, in Toronto. Now, Nola is, or has been, an extremely successful lawyer, I have to say. But she's now also a minister. And one of the things she was saying is, she said, parents today will give their strong views to their children on virtually every topic you can think of. But for some reason, when it comes to religion, they all kind of hum and haw and say, we'll let the kids make up their own minds. So they're perfectly willing to give guidance on everything apart from religion. And it seems wrong to me. And of course, we're now going to the opposite extremes, and you can no longer say Happy Christmas. This may be Happy Festive Season or whatever, but Happy Christmas? Oh, no, that's not good. Oh, no, you can't say prayers at school. I mean, when I went to school, we always had the common meeting when we first arrived, and there was always a prayer and a hymn sung, and then we went on and had the rest of the school. That doesn't really happen nowadays. So Christianity as such is not in our education. And yet these early Scots, that Christianity, basic Christianity, was ingrained in them right from the start. So I think I think that's a problem. I mean, I have no problem with someone being a Buddhist or a Muslim or whatever. In fact, the trouble is Muslims tend to do what the Scots did in the old days. They were all brought up with the Bible, but Muslims today are all brought up with the Quran. And they all study it right from an early age. Yet we no longer, the Christians as such, which is more or less a Western culture, no longer study the Bible in the same depth as the current Muslims do. And so I mean, I can't say that a lot of the people that were eminent Scots went on to be religious people, although I think quite a number of them were regular church goers. I mean, even our national bard Robert Burns went to church, you know. But I think that's one common theme. The second common theme was the school conditions. I don't think the schools were particularly good. And therefore, I'm kind of suggesting that today, when we seem to be worried about the infrastructure for schools, I don't think that has a big bearing, or shouldn't have much of a bearing, on how successful we are on the basic education front. But the thing is that we've got a kind of common standard coming through on discipline. I mean, if you're not paying attention, you got whacked over the ear. I mean, I remember when I went to school, I remember a French class I had. I paid very good attention to that French class. Why? Because if I wasn't attentive, next thing I know, I could get a book flung at me. And that book could hit my eye and give me a real black eye and stuff like that. I mean, it was a dangerous class to be in. Got thwacked round the head with a ruler or something like that. But by golly, it made you pay attention. There was no mucking around in that class by anyone, I can assure you. And in those kind of conditions, it meant that you actually would study and listen to the class and listen to the teacher. So this namby-pamby bit about, oh, don't you dare hit my child, frankly, I think that's at the root of a lot of the problems that we have today. Discipline is just not there anymore. So that's the kind of core. I mean, there are other core, like almost all of these Scots I looked at, when they eventually finished their education, went out into the world, I think almost all of them had a really tough time. I mean, a lot of them wondered where their next meal was coming from. They were that badly off. But they persevered. They took any job they could get just to get food, rather than anything else. I mean, today we have a very soft lifestyle in many respects. I mean, back then there was no social security. So, you know, if you weren't earning any money, you starved. There was no one coming along and give you a handout or anything like that. It were tough days. And I think we can learn a lot from looking at how they got on with things in those days. Because today, as I say, I feel we're a namby-pamby society. We really are. Goody-goodies, you know, oh, you can't hit my child, you know, oh, I'll take you to court and all that kind of stuff. And because there's no discipline, kids get away with anything. So I think if you really want to study about where we're going in education, I mean, Bill Gates with his brilliant ideas, you know, frankly, I think he's wasting a lot of his money. I wish he would spend more money on getting rid of spam or finding a way to get around email spam. That's where he should be focusing his efforts, not on this education thing. To me, education is very simple. Make sure people learn and have the conditions at school where they will sit and pay attention and study and read. That's what it's all about. The very basics have got to be there, and we've lost them. We've lost them. So there you go. That's just my findings. But I thought they were pretty amazing because, one, I didn't realise they were all brought up with the Bible, and they were. I didn't realise that most of them were just brought up in one-room schools. And I also didn't realise that there was such harsh discipline in schools that obviously made you pay attention. But clearly it worked. And it worked for hundreds of thousands of Scots that went all over the world and did amazing things. So perhaps we should use history, look back at it and see what we can learn from that. So that's my contribution, you might say, to the education debate that's rising all over the world about how we can do better at school. So I hope you enjoyed this little chat, and certainly would encourage you to read biographies of these prominent people because we can learn so much from how they did things. Thank you for listening.